Good afternoon. The Public Safety Committee will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Odenberg. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Narayan.
Here.
Alderman Odenberg. Alderwoman Keys. We have 5 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you for that. Quorum being present, I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of Thursday, May 30th, 2024.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Alderman Odenberg. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Keys.
Here.
We're on the minutes.
Oh, aye.
Thank you. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Narayan.
Aye.
Alderman Odenberg. We have 6 aye votes.
All right, with that, we've sustained the motion and approved the minutes of Thursday, May 30th. At this hearing, we have no board bills for review and no resolutions for review. The reason that we are coming together today is for committee discussion item number 1, which is a surveillance discussion with the police chief. I want to just lay a couple things out first to clear up any confusions. This conversation that we're having today is as a result of the executive order, not as a result of the Alderman Aldridge's board bill. There are things contained in that board bill that may not be presented today because they A, aren't required to, and B, I know that the police department has been working on those things, use plans, things of that nature. And so just so that people know, if they were expecting to hear those use plans today, this is as a result of the executive order, not the board bill. So that conversation will be forthcoming in the future. And I've spoken with the chief about that, and he's looking forward to coming forward again to comply with that board bill on the timeline that it lays out for the plan. And I know that they're working diligently on that. With that, I will turn it over to you, Chief Tracy. Make sure the green button or the green light is on. Button.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and good afternoon to the Public Safety Committee Board, Board of Aldermen as well. Thank you for allowing me to speak to a really important subject when it comes to public safety, surveillance technology report, and pleased to be here today to be able to maybe talk about some things and really explain some of these things without compromising investigations. But I think we can talk a lot about this to make sure that people have a good understanding what we're doing, what we're not doing, and also how we're protecting civil liberties, how there's safeguards in the systems that we use, and things in the rules of law and policy that we have in place to make sure that we're good partners with the community, making sure that we're trying to keep the place safe at the same time, protecting people's civil liberties. So with me today, I have Dr. Dennis Mayers. He's a professor of criminal justice and director of Center of Crime and Science, Violence Prevention at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. I also have Sergeant Marco Silva, who actually works in the Real-Time Crime Center, oversees a lot of these technology and making sure that when we audit it and make sure we do the reports, that's going to be part of the ordinance to make sure that we get that information out in timely manners and sharing and being very transparent. Monet Cintron, who works with me in my offices here, as well as Mitch McCoy. So that's the team that's with me here today from SLMPD, and I appreciate it. I'll get started with the presentation, sir.
Absolutely.
So we have a PowerPoint if everybody could take a look at. So first thing is if we can go to the next page, we're going over the Executive Order 78 Mayor Jones issued in February 23rd, and it requires the SLMPD to report on the use of surveillance technology in advance of the first SLMPD-related hearing of the Board of Aldermen on budgetary processes, which we actually kind of did some of that a couple of weeks ago. This report we did put out with some information, and the executive order requires the department to describe how we use technology, and how it's used, and if we're using artificial intelligence, and how it's funded, and, any complaints against the police for the use of this specific technology. Partnerships exist to use this technology. Police policy related to the use of surveillance technology now can be found on SLMPD's website and have been available since late February. So I encourage everyone to go to the website to get another understanding, because to go through all that today, I'm going to kind of direct people to go to things because we've already put them out with the written policies, and we'll go over any questions at the end of my presentation, and also Dr. Dennis Mayer's presentation. So the funding, overall total spending for surveillance technology amounted to approximately $4.84 million. This includes local, state, federal dollars, as well as support from private foundations. Of the total funding, approximately 6%, $276 million, was from 6%, $276,000 was from private foundation donors. Am I reading that right? Overall spending on surveillance technology amounted to $4,848,498. This represents less than 1% of our total budget in the city of St. Louis, $1.3 billion budget. And it's less than 3% on this technology of our overall police budget, which is $189,814,000. So very minimal for this type of technology to help leverage and make sure we can keep our community safe. The surveillance technology we're talking about today is cameras, mugshot comparison, cybercrimes, crime analysis technologies, GPS investigative technologies, which is 2 parts, cell site simulator, license plate readers, ShotSpotter, which is now called Sound Thinking. The cameras, we have fixed cameras. They're permanently fixed at 630 locations citywide. Funding for this is $238,000 is ARPA funded, $70,000 is city funded, and $120,000 is foundation funded, and $79,000 is grant funded. We have mobile cameras. You see them out there. We can move them around on trailers. They have an extended camera that goes up. We move them to locations throughout the city, sometimes requested by citizens, sometimes where we see crime trends, and sometimes even at the request of some of our aldermen or alderwomen that are sitting here right now. These mobile cameras, there's 30 trailers that we have in the city of St. Louis. Funding for that was 1.7 from ARPA, and 241,000 of that is grant funded. We also have body-worn cameras. These cameras are fitted to the officers' uniforms. Right now, we have about 800 body-worn cameras, and the funding for that is through the city at $1.2 million. When it comes to the cameras, in-car cameras, the camera installed in the patrol vehicle, the funding for that is $753,000, and that's city funded. We have aerial cameras when it comes to our aviation unit, which we also share with the county in St. Charles County. Cameras mounted on the Metro Air Support helicopters, 2 downlink videos or unmanned aircraft systems and drones. We have 2 of them. Funding zero, because they were both one-time purchases. Environmental investigations unit. These are cameras that are placed in public areas to address the quality of life complaints received by citizens. That's where we have a problem with is illegal dumping in areas, and we can catch the individuals that are doing this, and it's usually at the request of our community meetings or our commanders. Funding for that is $79,000 through the Street Refuge Grant Fund. There's no artificial intelligence used by this agency when it comes to cameras, and the videos produced by recording cameras are maintained for 30 days and are automatically deleted unless used as evidence in active criminal investigations. Mugshot comparison. The St. Louis Mugshot Recognition Technology, SMRT as we call it, is picture search technology similar to Google image search. That is part of the state's Regis system, which is part of the criminal justice system that all local police departments use up into the state system. And it compares a digital image of a person against the databases of criminal mugshots to assist with possible investigation of criminal incidents, getting a picture of a person at a crime and trying to identify who that individual is. Cybercrimes and crime analysis technology. These are systems that use for extraction of data from various devices, which is used as evidence to crimes against children investigations and/or other violent crimes. Data is obtained after a search warrant has been issued. No artificial intelligence is used by SLMPD, and this is funded by St. Charles County, $2,000, and the Police Foundation by $11,000. So we are sharing some of these technologies with our other local law enforcements as a force multiplier to get some of these systems. GPS investigative technology, 2 types of devices. The vehicle attached to vehicle after a court-ordered search warrant. We have 14 devices. Funding is $5K, and it's city-funded. Subscription-based location technology. This is third-party owned device requested to be tracked. Items are stolen or high-value items is 1 subscription. The funding is $4K, it's city-funded. There's no artificial intelligence used by the SLMPD on this. Cell site simulator. The system that is capable of obtaining directional information based on location of device with a court-approved search warrant, unless there's exigent circumstances exist, which even if we have to use that, it's very rare, we're still going to look for get the search warrant to obtain this through a court-ordered from a judge. Example, attempting to locate an endangered missing person or suspect or a child after a kidnapping, etc. Those are emergency exceptions. No artificial intelligence is used by SLMPD, and the system was purchased in 2014 through an urban security initiative, and it's a one-time purchase. That's a UASC grant. And then license plate readers. These are units that are installed at traffic signals throughout the city of St. Louis with the capability of reading license plates. The license plate information is compared to a list of stolen or wanted motor vehicles. We have 379 units throughout the city, and the funding, approximately $17,000 through the Police Foundation is funded, and then also funded through the Board of Public Service. Data is retained for 90 days and automatically purged. No artificial intelligence used by SLMPD. And we've been having great success with these LPRs as soon as people have either had their car stolen and or they, unfortunately, they've been carjacked. We can get ahead of these individuals that are doing these crimes, and we've had great success breaking down some of these rings of carjackers and or people that are out there stealing vehicles, holding them accountable so that they don't go back out and reoffend. ShotSpotter. This software maker provider is also called SoundThinking now. It's formerly known as ShotSpotter, but this technology uses acoustic sensors to detect gunshots and triangulate within 82 feet where shots have been fired. And that's huge, being able to go within 82 feet. I mean, I was even out with my wife last night at a community function, and someone told, if you hear shots fired about 10 blocks away, how do they call 911? Because they don't know where it's coming from, but they know it's within 5 to 10 blocks, but it's not in front of them on their block. And I said, well, that's why this technology can help us get to the areas we need to be. And they said, well, you know, if I don't know where it is, should I call 911? So you get a lot of people not knowing whether to call 911 or not, and this system can help us get to the scene, and if someone's shot, to render first aid and or collect evidence, or actually get people coming away that might be suspects in that crime. So these are the type of things that where people are asking me the questions at every community meeting. These are some of the answers I give them, and you know, I try to say this technology used in the right way can help bring down violent crime, get the trigger pullers off the streets, where I know Dr. Dennis Maris is going to get to some examples, but I can give some live examples, and I will right after I do this. So the funding, no artificial intelligence is used by the SLMPD when it comes to ShotSpotter or SoundThinking, as it's called. The funding is $64,000 grant funded, $130 Police Foundation funded, and $242,000 funded by civil asset forfeiture. In 2008, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department acquired ShotSpotter, initially covering 0.5 miles. In 2013, it expanded to additional 3 square miles. In 2020, the department increased the coverage by 1.66 square miles, and in 2021, the department added another 1.1 square miles, bringing the current total coverage to 6.26 square miles, and the city, as we all know, is approximately 66.2 square miles. So it's about 10% of the geography is being covered in our city. Between January, can we go to the next slide? Between January 1st and let's just say annual 2023, we received over 14,000 ShotSpotter activations. And overall, just for the city as itself, just from calls without ShotSpotter, that's the whole city, there's only been 11,221 calls. So you can see how many times we're responding to scenes where, you know, and you'll hear from Dr. Dennis Maris, where I've also talked about this as far as gaining community trust. It's almost close to, in some cities, and I'm not going to steal his thunder about talking about it. He'll get into some of those statistics, but close to 80% of the time, people are not calling 911 when they hear shots fired. So, you know, this is building trust because people think we're not responding, but unless we hear it and no one's calling, we're not going to respond. And it's not out of lack of caring, but it's a lack of knowing. So when we have this technology that can help us get to the scenes on a priority 2 call, and we're looking for assistance from individuals, if someone is shot, that raises it up to a priority 1. Someone injured, we get the ambulance there as well. So 14,000 calls, we do respond to them all. If there's not an emergency at these calls, no one's left at the scene, it's prioritized too, but we will go there because we're looking for evidence of shell casings. We're making sure that you put them into a library, a National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, and then we're comparing them against another time that gun's used, possibly in a homicide or a non-fatal shooting. And we have time and time again, collecting those shell casings when nobody's been hit is just as important, because this is the stuff that we're using. And today, every day we're going through the amount of shell casings we're collecting, how they're coming back, are they matching? And even our CompStat today, we talked about a homicide today, and it would not have been solved had we not picked up the shell casings a week before, 2 weeks before, and there was nobody shot, nobody at the scene, but our office did respond to the scene, collect the evidence. When we did have the evidence from the homicide, homicide detectives were able to go back because there's correlation of the same gun being used. They went back to the scene where nobody was hit. They recanvassed additionally for cameras. They were able to find good video, identify a persons of interest, do further investigation, and then we also have someone in custody now. So that's a person that's brought to justice, a homicide that's going to be cleared. I can't talk more about it, only because it's still investigation ongoing, but I thought it was important to talk about that because that happened just today. So I'm not going back and searching for these success stories because of this. ShotSpotter in and of itself, alone, is not going to solve or reduce crime. You need ShotSpotter, cameras, LPRs, good detective work, evidence, forensics. So it's one piece of the overall pie, but it's a really important piece because we can connect guns being used throughout the city. When a gun's used once, either a shot fired or a crime, it's definitely going to be used again. And we can identify who the people are using them just by the areas that they are in, and we're looking to get trigger pullers off the street to keep our community safe. Next one, fairgrounds, please. ShotSpotter in Fairground neighborhood. Just as an example, in 2019, the Fairground neighborhood was not covered by ShotSpotter. St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department relied on 911 calls. This is people calling 911, and it was 58 calls for service with no ShotSpotter. 1 year later, in 2020, evaluate year versus year, there were 101 calls for service with ShotSpotter. So it almost doubled the amount of times that we responded to incidents to make sure that we were there either to collect evidence or possibly save someone's life if there was someone hit, because we can identify the area that they're in, and with secondary calls because of ambulance and stuff. We still need people to call us. So ShotSpotter, actually, if people don't know what it is, it's an activation received. St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department receives the location of the activation and how many gunshots were detected. It's looking for gunshots. It's not listening to the community. It's listening for gunshots. And it differentiates between fireworks, backfires, construction work, and sometimes there's a false positive, but they've gotten so good with their technology. And then sometimes if we go to a shooting in a ShotSpotter area, which is very rare, and we didn't get a call, we have a shooting, we actually go back and do an audit with them to review those things. Once again, we're always auditing this process to make it better, but it's only listening to gunshots. So can we just play the next thing? This is actually, I'm not going to go into the location, but this is a recent shooting in the last year. I'm sorry. Audio version, shots fired, but this can be used in judicial proceedings. This audio received by is recent shooting that occurred. No one died in this situation, thank God. But this is the amount of shots that we get and that we're doing as an investigation when using it for court purposes. Could you go back to the audio on that, please? There is audio.
Trying to see if we can.
I think it's important to get this.
Hold on for just one moment.
But I'm gonna find it. Give me 1 second.
if we can get that, and there's going to continue presentation. So
Sure,
not to
sure.
hold this up, Chairman.
Yeah,
Can
no,
I continue?
We can circle back around on that audio unless you need it right now for something.
No, I think during this presentation, if it does come up, I think it's pretty important. What we're hearing, because a lot of people don't know what we're listening to. This is exactly what we're listening to.
Oh, okay, wait, I think she's pulling up the clip right now. Madam Clerk, I think if you go on mute.
Your volume's down on the thing. They say volume off.
Yes, off.
There's dozens of gunshots in there. You're going to hear them successfully. They could be semi or fully automatic. You want to put this to the microphone? Okay. That's an 8-second.
Yeah, and for any at home who may not have been able to hear that was roughly 20 gunshots in 8 seconds, maybe in excess of that. Please proceed, Chief. Thank you.
And if we have to, I can get that audio that maybe people can hear if they did not hear it through. We're talking about technology here, and we're struggling with this, Chairman.
Absolutely.
So, shot spotter, can we go, we go back to the, one more slide? So ShotSpotter in the Dutchtown, Mount Pleasant neighborhoods. SLPD in collaboration with Professor Dennis Mayers, who's going to be speaking right after me as a dual presentation, is utilizing grant funding to expand the ShotSpotter coverage area in the Dutchtown, Mount Pleasant neighborhood by 1 square mile. This expansion is expected to occur in late summer, early fall. The placement of ShotSpotter is part of research conducted by Professor Mayers. So far this year, there's been 647 calls for shots fired by CAD calls, and we know we're missing a lot of them because I talked about the percentage of times it's not called. It's up to almost 80%, and the doctor Dennis Mayers will get into most of that on his research. And at this time, surveillance technology and policing, I'd like to, with your permission, to invite Dr. Dennis Mayers up to the podium.
Please do, Chief.
Thank you. And after he's continued, we'll be here for, I'll be standing by with the doctor for questions and my team.
Perfect. And if you could just state your name for the record, sir?
You got it. I'm Dennis Maris, Professor of Criminal Justice at SIUE.
And do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do swear that.
All right, please proceed.
Thank you. So I appreciate you. Next slide, please. And you can go to the next one as well. I'll try to give you guys a bit of an insight into how we as academics try to study surveillance technology and what kind of policy implications that has for us, I think. So some folks probably know me from some of the earlier ShotSpotter studies I have done in St. Louis, and in those studies I found effectively that ShotSpotter did not appear to be effective in reducing gun violence. And my thought at the time was, well, police can't get there fast enough to make an arrest. What I didn't think about at the time, I think, is that there is more than just an immediate arrest when you're responding to a ShotSpotter call. As an academic, you want to learn more about how things work, how they operate, how people in the field. And I've worked since then on quite a few research projects across the nation with various police departments on technology implementation and evaluation. And over time, I've become very differently, viewing police technology and the impact it has on our communities. Some of the other things I would argue, too, what has changed my view on police technology is my own personal experience. In 2022, I was the victim of a home invasion, an armed home invasion, in which three people came into my house with a firearm, put it to my head, and demanded a vehicle. which I, of course, handed to them. The folks got away. I live, by the way, not in the city of St. Louis, and the offenders were not from the city of St. Louis, but they ended up traveling to the city. The St. Clair Sheriff's Office, who covers my area, had already released a license plate of my vehicle to the Real-Time Crime Center at the time. And within 12 hours, they were apparently packed up within the city of St. Louis. The RTCC folks tracked them. They were heading back toward the bridge to go back to St. Louis, or to the Illinois side. And they intercepted them and arrested the guys. So from that point of view, too, I have a personal experience with police technology and how it personally benefited myself and my feelings as a crime victim, I would say. Next slide, please. So a lot of folks criticize surveillance technology, and with surveillance technology, and let me clarify a little bit more what I'm specifically discussing here, and that would be surveillance technology like camera networks. I'm not talking red light cameras here. For me, it's more the actual camera networks, license plate readers, and things like ShotSpotter and mobile surveillance trailers. That's where my area of expertise is. And I hear a lot of criticism from folks in the community, from fellow academics, from lawmakers. And three of the key criticisms I hear over and over reiterated on police technology are, it's a privacy concern. The reality, though, is that police departments, by and large, have instituted very clear policies that discuss data retention. In most cases, footage, for instance, is never saved for more than 90 days unless it's involved in an incident. Other folks, too, argue, ShotSpotter is just recording us all the time. Well, that's not the case. The way ShotSpotter works and records data is a loud sound needs to be picked up by 3 sensors, 3 microphones from ShotSpotter for it to trigger that recording. And only then will it be recorded, reviewed, and if necessary, forwarded to the police department. So it doesn't get triggered by conversations for sure. And frankly, the way they are positioned and mounted the sensor for ShotSpotter, it would be very difficult to follow conversation. So technology doesn't really pose a lot of privacy concerns as far as I can tell. Then a more serious concern is, of course, that technology and the way we implement this is that it targets communities of color and will, as a result, lead to more stops, arrests potentially, and potentially also officer-involved shootings, those community members. So what's the response to that? Well, I think in part two, and everybody knows, right, gun violence is extremely concentrated. And you want to put the resources where the victims are. You want to make sure that you can aid the victims as best as possible in their sense of justice. And I think in that sense, it makes sense that we put these things in the high gun violence locations. Now, that too, it doesn't really assuage people's concerns, I think, about, well, what does that mean for the people when police do show up? Are police gonna come in guns a-blazing, respond to, for instance, a ShotSpotter alert? As the chief just indicated, in St. Louis, it's a priority 2 call. That means it's already not the highest priority. That means that the stress levels aren't gonna be the highest for sure. And frankly, I think if you would ask most police officers, what is more stressful, responding to a domestic disturbance or responding to a gunshot, I think most officers will tell you it's probably more stressful to respond to a domestic disturbance. And we're not going to suggest, I don't think anybody suggests, that police shouldn't respond to a domestic disturbance. So why are we telling them to not respond to a gunfire alert? So I think, too, the final criticism I hear a lot is that technology is inaccurate and makes mistakes. And I'll address this a little bit with respect to both license plate readers as well as ShotSpotter. Yes, nothing is 100% accurate. Nobody expects it to be 100% accurate. The question is, what is the comparison here? What are we comparing efficacy, accuracy to? And I think really what we're comparing it to is the humans that normally report incidents, the humans that are the eyewitnesses. And is the technology better than the humans in determining what color and make and year of vehicle was, what the license plate number of that vehicle. And if I'd had to guess, I would trust the cameras in that case over the humans. Going back to my own victimization, I couldn't tell you any which way the folks that came into my house looked, what they wore. The only thing I remember from that incident is the gun. That's all. So as humans, we are incredibly fallible and we make a lot of mistakes. So if we can get some extra help with technology, why should we not take it, I think? So I think if we're comparing the functionality, the accuracy of technology versus us as humans, I think that the technology really lends an additional layer of accuracy to it that we can't do as humans. That is not to say that mistakes are not made. And that's why you have good policies. That's why you train people well. That's why you have a degree of oversight on these things. And that's important too. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit more about gunshot detection and why I think it's an important technology that really should not be eliminated from St. Louis's toolbox. There's three primary reasons, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about each. One, and they're in no particular order, lack of citizen reporting. Chief already kind of mentioned that. I'll get into this here a little bit. Assisting investigations, and of course, aiding gunshot victims. Next slide, please. So when we talk about underreporting of gunfire in St. Louis, I did a study. It hasn't been published yet. It's one of the things that's sitting on my desk, and I need to write it out more thoroughly, but the numbers were ran, and basically what I did is I looked at 25,000 ShotSpotter alerts. We then merged those alerts into incidents because ShotSpotter sometimes does provide multiple alerts for a single incident where multiple people are shooting. So if you have a 5-second pause between gunfire, ShotSpotter will generate a new alert. So we combined those duplicate cases, and then we ended up with almost 22,000 ShotSpotter incidents. So of those 22,000 incidents, 86% did not have a matching call for service from the community. That's a lot by any shape, right? So what does that mean? It means that 86% of gunfire probably is not getting a response. That means that you have people sitting in these houses hearing those gunshots that you just heard, and no police comes by. The area I live in, I hear gunshots all the time too. And I hear no police sirens. And it's disappointing because you expect there to be a response. You expect there to be some acknowledgement of this going on. And I think that's important for community members. And like the chief said, I think community members by and large are very supportive of these technologies. That's what the surveys indicate. They also indicate policing can use improvement, and I would agree with that too. But those two things are not incongruous with each other. Next slide, please. So what makes it more likely that a resident calls in a gunshot? There's a couple of things. The main feature of the analysis I did shows that the number of rounds fired in the incident is a factor. The more gunshots, the more likely a community member is to report it. So if you're only looking at incidents in which one round was fired, only about 8% of gunshots are reported to police. Same thing with time of day. At night, reporting goes down, and that makes sense, right? We're asleep at night. And if it wakes us up, do we have any sense of where this gunfire may have come from? So are we going to call police at that point? No, because we don't know what to tell them or where to go. Same thing with the weekends. Reporting goes down during the weekends. And we used the city's parcel data and looked at vacant properties and vacant parcels, and we found that there too, that if a gunshot alert, a ShotSpotter alert occurs near or on or near a vacant property or vacant parcel, reporting goes down too, and that makes some sense. When you look, for instance, at some streets in North St. Louis, the entire street is almost vacant. Who's going to report in that street? if you got a few houses left, are those people going to feel comfortable reporting to police? Because the folks shooting the guns might come back after them. There is a real serious fear of retaliation in the community as well. So it makes sense that people don't always report these things, unfortunately. In this work, I was not able to, for instance, measure the level of trust in police and the fear of retaliation and how those impact gunfire, because it's a very different research approach. You need more survey data for that. This was a statistical analysis. But all those things matter, I think. So we know that reporting of gunfire is incredibly dependent on the situation and the context when you're relying on community residents. With ShotSpotter, none of that stuff really matters. It either works or it doesn't. Next slide, please. So why is responding to all gunfire important? I think primarily from a moral standpoint to assist victims. And I will say, too, that many of the gunshot victims in our city here are not innocent persons by themselves, right? They have been involved oftentimes in other things, but that does not mean that they do not get aid. They deserve aid just as much as anybody else. It's a moral thing that we have to do. If we can help these folks stop the bleed, get them to the hospital quicker, I think that's a good thing. I don't think we should be against that. Second, firing guns. Even if you're not shooting at people, you're just doing target practice, or you're shooting because it's July 4th. That stuff is dangerous. It comes back. We all know it. It shouldn't be tolerated, frankly, because it's dangerous. I have found a variety of projectiles around my house over the years because that's what happens. The bullets come down. I think ultimately, the response to gunfire means that you show, and this is me agreeing here with the chief, it shows that you care about the well-being of the community. It shows you take gun violence seriously and that you investigate it as much as you can. Community members understand that not everything is solvable. But I think community members also appreciate police showing an interest in their issues, in the problems in their community. And then finally, responding to gunfire is important, as the chief mentioned, because you're going to collect casings, shell casings, and you can link those together using NIVAN analysis. That helps a lot, not now, but also in the future for other cases. You can see where this gun has been used, whose hands it's been in probably. You can make connections, and that's important for investigative work. Next slide, please. So does ShotSpotter help investigative efforts? I think it's an absolute yes for me, but it's difficult to show this, and I'll give you this example here, and it may be difficult for some folks to read this because the font's kind of a little bit small because I got a little long-winded. Anyway, so here's an example, and these are fictional examples, but these are examples that stroke what I've seen in police reports. So just want to make sure that these are not actual addresses of things where these things have happened. So oftentimes when you look at crime reports, victims end up showing up in the hospital. A lot of these victims are not cooperative with police, will not tell police where the incident happened or even sometimes when the incident happened. So police have to go on whatever they're being told if they don't have ShotSpotter records. That means they're going to the wrong site sometimes, not finding anything. If you have a ShotSpotter alert, you end up being able to verify if the victims are telling you the right information. And you can then say, hey, but this is what we found. We didn't find anything at this location, but we found this stuff here. Would you like to change your story? These are important tools, I think, for investigators to coax victims into being a little bit more cooperative with the investigation and to assist the investigation rather than to sometimes obstruct it. In other cases, you may, and this is where technology integrates with other technology, you might have a deceased person who was shot. If you don't have a ShotSpotter alert, you don't know oftentimes what time this individual was shot. If you have the ShotSpotter alert, you have the exact time of that, essentially. give and take typically a few minutes. That helps because when investigators go to look into this and they have to pull any kind of video footage from that specific area, it helps really narrow down the amount of footage they have to go through. That means that they're making less mistakes in that investigation because it has less footage to go through. That means the investigation will wrap up more rapidly, meaning that they can get to other cases as well. So I think there are very distinct benefits investigatively to ShotSpotter, but they're very difficult to show in the statistics that we can pull from typical police sources. You really have to dig into the data, and that's not something that academics like myself often have time for. Most of the time when we do this stuff, what we do is we look at the number of casings, the number of firearms recovered, and sometimes the number of arrests. And for the few studies that have done this, have actually shown relatively decent successes with that. So oftentimes when ShotSpotter is implemented, the number of casings goes up. The number of firearms retrieved goes up. Arrests, that's a little bit more of a mixed bag, but that has a lot to do with the numerical aspect. I can get into that later on if you'd like me to. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think really what it comes down to when we're talking about police technology, and particularly ShotSpotter, is assisting victims. There is no question, and there are studies out there that have shown that if you have ShotSpotter, victims will get quicker immediate aid and are transferred more rapidly to a trauma center. That's important. We don't know to what extent, to the amount of lives the system saves in that way. In reality is a lot of gunshot victims are either going to make it or not, but there is a small group of folks who are critical and for which every second counts. And if you can shave off any time, it will help these folks. So studying the health benefits to victims is a tough one, and that's why really has looked into this very well yet. Because you would need data probably from multiple cities to assess it, just to get enough data. Next slide, please. So there are other potential benefits as well. When you just use the data from ShotSpotter, you can quickly see which houses are problematic. So here's an example. These are 26 alerts, total of 80 gunshots at one parcel in the city. And I looked up the house on Google Street Maps when I did it, and it was a vacant property. That's why I'm showing it. But what it shows us is that we have properties that are deeply problematic and that are a nuisance to their community. Nobody wants to live next to that. What can we do next with this knowledge? Well, there's a variety of things that we can do, right? We can engage in problem-oriented policing. We can start, and you can see it here on the picture, there's a lot of foliage on that particular parcel, which is probably providing a lot of opportunity for folks to go undetected shooting gun. Cut that stuff down. That's problem-oriented policing. If the problem doesn't go away, you can look even into demolishing the property if it's not of historical significance or if it's structurally deficient. But these are things you can also do with the information that systems like ShotSpotter produce. You can also use it even to work with community violence interrupters because ShotSpotter is instantaneous. ShotSpotter actually, I think, is reasonable enough to provide access to CVI providers to get access to the data so that they can immediately respond to shootings going on in specific spots where they operate. So there's a lot more probably that can be done with the technology. We're not always leveraging it to max effect. But I think it does have a lot of potential for doing things for the betterment of the community. Next slide, please. So as the chief was saying, the police department is looking to expand ShotSpotter in a small area in South City. And I will tell you a little bit of backdrop of that particular grant project I've been involved with. It's called the Smart Policing Initiative. The Smart Policing Initiative is a very selective grant program. And typically, only 8 police departments in the United States get awarded a grant under this program. It's highly competitive, it's highly focused on evidence-based practices and partnering with university folks that can provide a thorough evaluation of the project. And that's what I am hoping to do for the city of St. Louis for this project. When we were initially awarded the grant in 2021, we had anticipated to do a project more focused on beefing up the actual response to ShotSpotter to cities like Cincinnati and Winston-Salem that have a much higher priority on the call, so they get there quicker. And that's what we had intended to do initially. But personnel constraints make that rather challenging, and so we ended up having to pivot. The Bureau of Justice Administration, which is the wing of the DOJ that oversees this project, argued that we needed to do something with gun violence. And so we ended up, negotiating with them, how can we do this best? And we settled on, let's expand a small section of the city with gunshot detection. Let's tie it in with license plate readers, because a lot of the residential neighborhoods in St. Louis don't have a lot of license plate readers. Because of the old infrastructure, it makes it sometimes challenging to put that stuff up. So combining ShotSpotter with the license plate is actually a brilliant idea, because one, nobody has really looked at this combination, but two, oftentimes when you do have shootings, the offenders flee and you can catch them on the LPRs. With ShotSpotter, you have an exact time that you can start looking at LPR records for. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to positively identify folks, but it gives you leads, and leads are important for solving things and holding offenders accountable. The project also includes funding for forensics, because as we know, more ShotSpotter means more shell casings. That puts the pressure on the forensics lab. So the forensics lab is getting a new microscope under this program as well. That will be an important addition for them and will help reduce them fighting over the microscopes to get the shell casings investigated. Next slide, please. So I will do the evaluation of this SBI project. And of course, we're going to look at the impact on gun violence. That stands without reason. That's important. I don't know that we're going to be able to draw very firm conclusions from this because it's a relatively but I think I have some ideas on how we can expand that a little bit. When I initially studied ShotSpotter in St. Louis, this was before the Incident Review Center was set up at ShotSpotter itself. What that means is that prior to, I think, 2014, 2015, ShotSpotter would forward any alerts, any loud sounds to a police department. That may be part of the reason why my results were lackluster. Now, ShotSpotter filters the call, reviews them by people, and only sends them out if they're really quite certain that it is actually gunfire. So we want to know, too, what is the impact on the investigative aspects of gun violence? And this will be a more qualitative analysis where I'm going to try to track these cases beginning at the ShotSpotter alert and seeing ultimately what the disposition of those cases are and whether they're forwarded for prosecution. We also want to know if LPRs provide an extra to get these cases to the finish line. And I want to study the health outcomes. What happens to the victims? Are we going to be able to improve outcomes for victims when they are shot? Those are the things I want to look at, and I hope that, next slide, please. And I hope that you guys support us in this. In my opinion, as a researcher, surveillance technology on the whole has a relatively low risk for negative outcomes. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look for them. That doesn't mean we don't want to study them. That doesn't mean we don't want to try to mitigate them. But we also want to make sure that we can do the good things from it and use the good things for the good of our city, for a larger community, for our region, for everybody that's impacted by gun violence. And what I can tell you that I've seen over the years in police departments is that successes with technology are driven by In some cases, the resources a police department has, but a lot of it hangs too on thoughtful implementation and the best practices that police departments follow. And I can tell you that what I've seen happen over the course of the years that I've been involved working with St. Louis Police Department, that best practices have improved a lot. The chief was talking about follow-up investigations for ShotSpotter. This was something that was initially not done. That's an important one because that's where you get the shell casings. That's where you find your evidence. So I hope you will agree with us that this is an important feature of modern-day policing, that you will help us understand, and you know, if you have concerns, me as a researcher, at least, I can tell you I'm happy to address those concerns as best as I can. And if I can't answer those questions, I want to find that answer for you. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I have a couple questions for the chief, and then a couple questions on ShotSpotter. Just my notes go in the order of the presentation, so I'll just take those questions that way. Chief, if you could tell me a little bit more the difference between the two GPS systems. You'd said one was subscription-based and one, you know, you get a warrant, you place it on a car. Could you tell me what the subscription-based one is?
Mr. Chair, with that, I can give a high level, but if you really want the details, I brought some subject matter expert with me. That would be Sergeant Marco Silver. And can I
Okay.
use him, sir, to explain that? Because
Sure.
getting into those details, he's the one that's monitoring it, making sure, and I would love for having him represent on this to make sure I don't miss
Sure,
it.
absolutely.
Sergeant Marco Silver, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department.
Hello, sir.
Thank you, Sergeant. Yeah, so I was just kind of curious, in the presentation, there was two different kinds of GPS. One, I gathered that you place on a car after a warrant. The other one was subscription-based, and I was just curious on that subscription-based one, what that is.
Yeah, it's just a third-party service that, you know, that tracks the GPS that's placed. And it's a small GPS that's usually tracking like high valuable items and whatnot.
So it's the same thing, essentially. That's just
Exactly, yes.
That's the service that tracks the GPS that you place.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay,
and it's
okay.
paid monthly. Well, I think it's paid yearly.
I got you. So one of the officers places this after a warrant, and then
Right.
this is the service that tells you where that thing has gone.
Yeah, we don't do that data on the GPS ourselves. It's by the third parties.
Okay, that makes a lot of
That's the
sense.
subscription.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
And then on the cell site simulator, or is that?
I'm going to bring Sergeant Marco Silva back up for that. Marcos, you better stay up here with
So I know that this has been the subject matter of a lot of controversy over the years. The cell site simulators, I guess, also known as Stingray. And at first there was some discussion as to whether.
I'm going to jump in.
Oh, sure. Whether or not we had them, we were utilizing them, when we were utilizing them. In the presentation, I think that you brought forward some really great examples of when you might want to use it, a missing child trying to call home, so on and so forth. But exigent circumstances are always just interesting to me because you don't know them until you're there. In the past, has the city used just protest in general as an exigent circumstance?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, sir?
The answer is no. 1 second, Marcos. The answer would be no on that. That's not exigent circumstances for protests. It's very rarely done. But Chairman, I heard you talk about Stingray. Now, Stingray, that type of technology is very, very sophisticated. And I've worked in 2 other cities where I had the President of the United States was one of our resident at times. That's used by the Secret Service. That blocks all cell signals for the safety, and that's a high priority. It's not something the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department has or uses. It would be something that more of a Secret Service would use under their protocol. So we don't have that. When it comes to cell site simulators, when we're looking at these things, that's try to identify where we can go and proactively look for where we're looking for the technology that the person might have on them to identify where they are as kidnapped, a missing person, a special missing endangered suspect or child after a kidnapping. Sometimes we usually can get a search warrant immediately on it. Should it be late at night where we probably might not be able to get to a judge in time, we will always try to get that search warrant because we don't want to compromise the arrest when we make the arrest, because that might sometimes become a court as a defense, and we want to make sure when we're doing this first sanctity of life of the person we're trying to look at. But there are emergency exceptions, so I don't want to say the exits don't use it. We certainly want to have that tool to keep people safe, but our first priority is to get that search warrant.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's okay. Perfect.
And then I moved to ShotSpotter in my notes. So thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant.
For ShotSpotter, you had indicated that it basically it had 3 different mics have to pick up a loud sound before the recording happens. So they are actively listening for that loud sound. They're just not recording what they're hearing. Is it like the Alexa in my house that is it hears when I talk, but it's not listening to me type thing?
Yeah, it sort of is like that, right? And ShotSpotter is the one you really should ask that question of, but it works the same way for other vendors as well. It's basically activated detects a loud impulse. So, it's a wave function. So when you have a gunshot, you have a quick buildup of sounds and then a quick drop off. And it's looking for that. And when that happens, that wave function in 3 distinct microphones at the same time, that's when it triggers the recording. And that recording then is reviewed first through the machine algorithms that ShotSpotter uses to detect whether it's likely gunfire or not. Then it gets reviewed. If it's determined that it is likely gunfire, it then goes through review. And when the human reviewers are confident too that it is in fact gunfire, then it will be forwarded to the police department as a ShotSpotter alert. So that means along the way, a lot of loud sounds are not forwarded to the police. They're dropped off in a different bucket so that you're not responding to a lot of loud noises that are not actually gunfire. So that is my understanding of the system as far as technology goes, how far I can go on the explanation of that.
Understand. And then, based on the recording that I heard, it was kind of faint, but you're saying it doesn't listen for anything other than the loud noise. Have there been instances of warrants being requested for ShotSpotter to actively listen to something? Does it have that?
Absolutely not. That's not what it's used for. We don't intend to use it, and nor are we going to use that in the future. And it's intended to filter everything else up but the gunshots. So we're not using it for anything else, nor listening to anyone, nor I don't think it would be simple. You're not knowing where it's coming from, but it's not something that we would do. We're not looking to do it in the future. That's something we'll.
Okay. And then in your presentation, you noted between 2018 and I think March of 21, there were 21 some odd thousand activations of ShotSpotter. You did note that sometimes there's more than one activation based on a gunshot. But what was interesting to me, there was 86% were not correlated with a matching call for service. I'm just curious, did you control for like New Year's Eve and events like that where we see a lot of celebratory gunfire?
Yeah, and you can take that out and it's not going to make it substantial.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious if that was
Yeah,
in the conversation even.
during July 4th as well as the I think ShotSpotter oftentimes, and I don't know what they do in St. Louis, but I've seen it in other cities where they basically tell you that, the system is going to get overwhelmed. And that means that the review process is delayed. So rather than delaying the process, they push out the calls and let police departments use their discretion in whether they want to respond to that or not. And I think that's probably the best solution, because during the New Year's, as you guys know, you have such a large amount of gunfire going off. You also have the problem of fireworks, which the sound signature can be very similar, and you have to really listen to it carefully to tease out whether it's gunfire or shots fired. And so that's why the review process can't handle it at ShotSpotter during those particular days.
Well, thank you. And that's all the questions that I have. I'll go down the committee now. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you for this very thorough presentation about the follow-up, about the impact, the physical, the mental impact on this. I would love to connect with you afterwards. I have some direct resources and direct contacts on that, starting with myself as the mother of a victim of gun violence, and then the amazing relationship that I built with the BRIC, the Bullet-Related Injury Clinic here in the city of St. Louis. So I think that would be, I think that they would bring value to the research, and I would love to connect you with them.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Is Alderwoman Keys still on?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you.
All right. Do you have any questions regarding the presentation?
No questions, but very, very good information. I felt like I was a student back at UMSL in my criminology classes. I am very thankful and happy with what our police department is attempting to do and put in place for our safety. The Sky Cops in my particular ward have been very helpful to curb some of the violence and gunshots that we hear. If it was in my power, I would buy you 50 more so that we could have more of those, because they do create an environment where people understand I can't come and do this here. And in our communities, we're very concerned about safety, and as many things as we can layer on to create a safer St. Louis. I am very grateful for that. Thank you.
All right. Alderwoman Velasquez, is she still on the call? All right. Any questions, Alderwoman?
I don't. Thank you for this presentation.
All right. Alderwoman Saunier.
I do.
You always do.
You know it. Thank you. Hello. Nice to see you, Chief. Nice to see you, Professor. First, thank you for coming today. I do think this is definitely a step in the right direction. I think this starts us on the path of transparency that folks in the community have been asking for a long time. And so I think you doing this, and I know you emailed this report to us some weeks ago, and I dug through it for sure. So I just really appreciated you sharing the information, and us, like, I think trust is earned, and these types of activities help us to earn that trust. My first question is on page 5 in the report. I don't know how all of these kind of correspond to your presentation, but I know they're kind of aligned together, but the presentation is a little synthesized. You said that there's a listing of you just list out all of the surveillance technologies, and Alderman Narayan kind of got at it. Can you explain for folks at home a little bit more in detail what a cell site simulator is? And I also want to clarify that that's what many folks might know as a Stingray.
I'm going to have Sergeant Marcos Silva come up for the cell site simulator, but I could talk to Stingray. We do not have Stingray.
Okay.
So it's technology that is not used by the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. We cannot cut off cell signals or censor anybody from sending information to and from in a local area. Is that technology out there? No, but it's not being used by the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, nor any local agency that I know of. For a cell site simulator, Marcos, come on back up, Sergeant Silva.
Thank you. Thank you, Alderwoman. Is there a specific question that you?
I just wanted to, for folks at home, a little bit of clarification. So like the chief just clarified, okay, we can't use it to like intercept cell signals, I think is basically what he's saying. That's kind of what people know the Stingray for. And you spoke a little bit in the presentation about what the cell site stimulators are. So I just want to clarify that my understanding is correctly, that essentially the cell site stimulator is used to kind of locate, like just if you could explain what is a cell site stimulator, what do we use it for?
That's exactly it. It's designed to locate a cell phone device.
Thank you. And do you know how frequently we might use the device? And I know you, like Chief Tracy, you mentioned specific crimes mentioned, and I think in your report you mentioned phase 1 crimes for this, and I'm not sure what phase 1 crimes are, so that might be helpful clarification.
And maybe part 1 crimes?
Phase 1 is what's in the report, is it says it's used for phase 1 crimes. I'm not really sure.
Suspect of
part 1 crimes, yes.
Yeah, violent crime.
Okay.
Like carjacking, robberies, like risk of life and death. Yeah, at part 1.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned that it was the cell site stimulator, which we have one. That's correct. We have one.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was, you said in a report it says it was purchased in 2014. Do you know what month we acquired that or purchased that?
I do not. It was. I do not know the month. Yeah.
Okay.
We can get that information
get
back
that.
to you through the chair.
Thank you. And then you also mentioned, or do you know a window, like if it was earlier part of the year, later part of the year, or you just need to go look that up?
I
Okay.
can stay back with you.
That's all right. It was a decade ago or so that's okay. And I guess my next set of questions was about the in-car cameras. So I noted that in the report, it says that we have 200 in-car cameras, but in December 2023, there was an incident at Bar PM at a South Broadway bar where the car didn't have a dash cam. So could you just clarify for us which police cars have the dash cams and which ones don't?
That car did have a dash cam. What happens is you have to go over a certain amount of speed for it to activate, or your lights and sirens have to be on for it to activate. Or you have a crash absolutely coming into a building in an accident. Unfortunately, it didn't activate. So I think when we talked about it didn't have an in-car camera, to correct the record, it had an in-car camera that didn't activate after the accident. But it wouldn't have activated before because it wasn't going over, I believe it's a certain speed. I'm not sure if it's about 65 miles per hour and/or lights and sirens turned on. And neither one was happening when the impact happened. But if a crash does happen, it's supposed to activate, which didn't happen at that time. But fortunately, our officers had their body-worn camera to record the whole incident.
So is the goal that all SLMPD vehicles have a dash cam? Is that mostly?
That's our goal, to make sure that when they go out and they're fitted for the road, when we get new cars, all cars are to be put with an in-car camera. And as we get new vehicles in, they get fitted with lights, radios, computer, and also an in-car camera. And then if anything goes down on a car, because it is technology, sometimes it can go down, we got to make sure we put a ticket in, it's called, to our technology resources to make sure we get that repaired or use another vehicle.
And you said that they get activated, you think it's about 65 miles per hour that the car has to be going for the camera to get activated?
Is it 60? I'm going off my memory here. I knew it was at least 65 or set. I believe it's 60 and up. In that, it'll go, if we go above 65 miles per hour, it automatically activates and/or lights and sirens or impact from a crash.
And does the officers who's maneuvering the car, is the camera all like kind of automatically activated, or does the officer able to turn it on and off?
No, the officers, if they hit, it automatically goes on. So they cannot override going over that speed. They cannot override if they turn the lights and sirens on. They cannot override. So it should go on.
So I guess, I know we don't do a whole lot of traffic stop, but recently we've been doing a traffic stop in different locations. I guess, people have different reasons for wanting the dash cams, but I guess my concern about it being 65 miles per hour, that's usually, you're moving down an interstate, you have a certain high speed road, and a lot of our residential areas, you can't go that fast. So a lot of those encounters would not be activated by a dash cam. Is that speed adjustable, or have we thought about the role of those dash cams for traffic stops?
Well, they do go on for traffic stops.
Right, but you said 65 miles per hour.
But for a traffic stop, they would be going on when the lights and sirens click on. So if we're putting our signals on to pull somebody over, they're
Okay.
automatically going
So it either is speed or the activation of the speed lights that cut the
to, or
camera?
both, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
On page 6 of the report, and this, I'm looking at the ShotSpotter data that's on page 6. It says that there were more than 14,000 notifications in that 1-year period, but I don't see a mention of how many arrests were made or charges were made. Is that information that can be shared with us or that is available?
Well, in the beginning and listening to the professors, it's tough to qualify them. Just like when we use cameras, we use license plate readers. To follow that through all the way, these are leads. And what happens is that it sometimes is very good leads to start using other tools, cameras, the timing of shots. So to start to try to quantify how many arrests are directly related to that, we have to come up with somewhat of a system. I think we would either undercount or people would say we're stretching. I believe that when we're used in a proper way, using as these leads, we don't, it's difficult to quantify that shot spotter led to arrest or it was a lead. So I would like to have that lead in an overall comprehensive investigation. So I wouldn't attribute it just to the shot spotter, and I don't want to do an overreach and overinflate the number, but it's certainly a great tool to have. So, I want to be careful how I quantify it, because then it can be challenged in a lot of different whose interpretation it is. But I can give you real live examples that I just talked about earlier today, that we're bringing justice to that family for a homicide victim because of ShotSpotter and officers picking up the shell casings from a ShotSpotter hit that nobody was hit. And we're now picking up the shell casings more and more because everybody's understanding the value. And we talk about, you hear about reports on how in Chicago, the Inspector General says ShotSpotter doesn't work for the city of Chicago. But what that Inspector General said is that he didn't say it didn't work. What he said, they weren't utilizing it properly to make it effective. And if you read through it, and I actually gave a report last year talking about that when that came up in the budget hearings, and I actually mentioned the professor that was here as well, that right behind me, Professor Dennis Mayers, that actually talked about those things. But to quantify them, very difficult.
I guess, I understand that correlation is not causation. I think that's a common thing in science. So I think that's a given, right? But I guess I'm curious, Professor Morales, I saw, and it looks like you're kind of walking back some of those findings, but in a 2021 study, you said over a 10-year period, there was 13 arrests. What did you use to identify those leads, or, how were you able to make those connections in that study for that purpose?
Yeah, and it's a very imperfect method to link specific ShotSpotter alerts to specific arrests. And here's why, right? Because one of the problems with it is that, is it just a ShotSpotter alert, or do we also have calls for service from the community? And if you do, who do you attribute the arrest to, right? So it gets murky really quick as to far as attributing the arrest. So when we looked initially, we only looked at calls that had only, I think, ShotSpotter alerts. So there were no corresponding citizen calls, if I recall right. And so that's where you would come out, because in the immediate response, oftentimes to ShotSpotter alerts, there will not be necessarily an arrest because you're not going to find anybody on site oftentimes, right? Oftentimes the offenders are gone. So if you're thinking that you're going to get a lot of immediate arrests of the system, I think that's not going to happen. The arrests are going to come out from the investigative part.
Yeah, I understand. For me, I think, I appreciate the personal stories. I'm familiar with the personal stories because I serve as an alder, so I see instances where we ShotSpotter, talk to officers all the time where it helps the investigation. But for this sake, when we're talking about people in the community really evaluating whether or not they want this technology in their communities, which I think they have a right to evaluate and assess and be critical of, I think that anything that we can do to form connections to show, because if the argument is here, hey, this helps us to do law enforcement, this helps us to hold people accountable, then I think that data is a little bit better than just personal narratives or heartstrings, because we're trying to tell, communities, hey, we want this technology in your community. So it might be a struggle. Maybe that's just a flag for later, especially because I read through all of your extensive research. I saw some of the projects you're working on. So it might be something for later, but I know that would be something that would be helpful to me as someone who has constituencies that could be a little critical of this, if I could point them to data and numbers and show them, hey, this is how many times this was helpful in helping officers to carry out investigations. But I will go on. Okay, so on page 7 of the report, under the section of cameras, At the very bottom of the list, there's a line for more than $750,000 for in-car cameras, but it doesn't say like a funding source. It just says in-car camera. Are any of you all today able to maybe identify what the funding source is or where that comes from? And if that's going to be a part of a later report where we're going to talk about some of those other funding sources, that's fine, but I just didn't see that in the report.
Did you say page 7, ma'am?
Page 7, under the section on cameras, all the way at the bottom, there's like a list.
And in-car cameras?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the in-car cameras, if you look at the PowerPoint, it comes under, I think, fifth page. When it comes to the cameras, in-car cameras, cameras installed in patrol vehicles, 200 in-car cameras. The funding is $753,000, and it's city funded.
No, my question is the source of the funding. Where is that funding coming from?
It's actually coming out of our budget.
Okay, I was just wanting that clarification. And on page 8, there's something that says mugshot comparison, and that this system is provided as a part of a Regis subscription. I'm a little familiar with Regis as my time as a mental health advocate. I'm sure it's a little bit of a different system, but I'm a little bit familiar with that. I was just curious about the subscription costs with that program.
Alderwoman, were you asking for the mugshot comparison?
For the subscription cost for it looks like you get it through.
Right, there isn't any, it's just included in there.
Okay. And then in you all's
The whole state uses that, so it's funded by the state for local municipalities.
Okay. And then in you all's presentation today, you talked about Mount Pleasant and Dutchtown, but I know that there are also cameras and things in Gravois Park. Was it that those cameras weren't in place at the time? Has those been added later? I'm just curious, why wasn't Gravois Park mentioned in the presentation?
Can you repeat that, ma'am?
In the presentation, you guys talked about there being like camera activity in Mount Pleasant and then Dutchtown, but you didn't make mention of Gravois Park, and I know that there are cameras in Gravois Park. Was there a specific reason why that wasn't included in the presentation? Were those cameras added later on, or?
I didn't talk about any neighborhoods other than we were going to add cameras. So I wanted to use as an example what CAD calls we had right now, and this is an area that has been identified with this study for the next 1 mile. I did not talk about every additional neighborhood that already has ShotSpotter. I talked about when they came in, but for timeliness of this presentation, I did not go specifically into each neighborhood that already has it. There's a heat map that has that out there showing exactly where we have it and when it came in. We can get you that information. But this was where we're looking to move forward with another mile and why we're doing it.
And you're looking to expand in the Dutchtown area? You're looking to expand ShotSpotter in Dutchtown? You just said South City, is it?
Yes, Dutchtown, Mount Pleasant neighborhood.
Okay. And then I was also curious about just our police department's data retention policy. Is it the exact same? Like, does it mirror the state retention policy schedule, or do we have our own?
Ma'am, we followed in the 90 days for the LPRs and the 30 days for the cameras, for the video. I believe, don't quote me on that, I believe I'll have to double check. I believe the state is 180 days, but I'll circle back with you on the state.
Okay.
If you look at some of the things that we're doing, we're more restrictive than what we're allowed to do in many cases. And we can get you to retention on each one of these things, but usually it's the 90 days or the 30 days for camera unless it's used for investigative purposes and arrest.
And my last question is more of a request. I know that you're going to come back later for CCOPS to get that, and I really appreciate your clarification at the beginning that this wasn't for a technology report, because I would have had some further questions, or I guess Alderman Orion's clarification. But when you come back for CCOPS, is it possible that you guys can see what information you can bring us? You might have to work with the prosecutor's options about convictions, because again, as someone who has a constituency that is they have a lot of questions, they're very skeptical of these types of things. I think for them, arrests are great, identifying suspects are great, giving evidence to carry out investigations. But I think what a lot of people want to know is, like, is this helping us to actually identify people who are committing crimes? So if we could get some data with convictions when you come back, that's just kind of my last request.
I'm not sure CCOPS. I know there's an ordinance in place, but I'm not sure.
Just in general.
It's not called that. It's called,
I think he was nodding behind you. I'm just saying when you come back and you do.
When we do the ordinance that was put in place.
Oh.
Correct. We'll definitely, whatever questions you need, if I can get this from the chair in advance, I'll definitely see what we can supply, and then hopefully we can get that data.
Okay, yeah, it's just, I know we're talking about arrest and things like that, I just would like some conviction data as well. But with that, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you, Chief, for being here, Professor, and all your staff. Just to clarify, the ordinance, yes, in place. Some may call it CCOP, some call it surveillance technology. I will say the ordinance gives more oversight than what this that we're doing now, the executive order. But to the clarification, it depends on the name, but we got it done with actually having oversight for technology. So a few questions. So the fixed camera is funded by, some of it is funded by ARPA in your presentation. It's a small penny amount, but, well, it's not small. Well, it's 238,000 was funded by ARPA. And then for the mobile cameras, which some people in the city may call them Sky Cops, I know you're trying to change that to mobile trailer cameras, has a funding of about 1.7 million ARPA. My question is, what was that funding for? Was that to buy more cameras? So under the camera.
Have Monet Cintron, if you don't mind, Chair, come up and answer that question.
Oh, now you want me to take it easy because Monet is coming. Okay.
I'll let you. I'll be right back. Chair, is it okay if I introduce Monet Cintron from our staff?
Absolutely. And Ms. Citron, if you could just step to the mic and state your name and title for the
Yes,
record.
Monet Cintron, Chief of Staff for the Chief.
All right, Alderman, please proceed.
How you doing, Monet?
Getting yourself.
So I'm just curious, on the it's on the slideshow, page 5, under cameras, it says like funding, where maybe some funding I'm assuming was most recent, but it says funding of 238,000 from ARPA and then 1.7 million ARPA funded. And I was just curious, I'm assuming that was a recent appropriation because we haven't always had ARPA funds, but was that to buy cameras or?
Yes, so that was to buy cameras. This money actually was spent on these things prior to us coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was before the chief got here. Because my question was, what would be and maybe you don't know this or don't since you wasn't here, was that because we needed to buy more cameras that ones were outdated, or we just, wanted to stock up to have more?
So for the fixed cameras, we were trying to get those in some locations, and I think it was to replace some of those as well?
The locations, I think it was 2 replacements.
If you could please step to the microphone so that the folks at home can hear.
Talking about just the Harper Grant cameras, I believe that was replacements, and the rest was new locations.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm good with that one on the funding. So I know you guys said that this is up on policy. I mean, that these technologies are on the website for policy. I noticed on the website there are 3 things missing from the policy as far as the cell site simulators, cyber crime analyst tech, and GPS investigation tech is not online.
All right, so you said cell site?
Cell site, cyber crime analyst tech, and GPS investigation tech is not online with policy.
Some of that stuff is gonna, when we do it, it'll have to be redacted because it'll leak information for investigations.
Okay. So are those the ones that may have warrants necessary? Okay.
All of those are warrants.
Okay. Long term, understand it, not trying to give the bad guys the whatever. They will be posted with some redactions.
Yep.
Not all 80 pages redacted.
Yes.
Okay. On page 5 of how many surveillance units are being used, ShotSpotters doesn't say how many are being used. Is there a reason? I guess this would be me and Monet dance.
So ShotSpotter actually gives the square mileage because it's not based on how many devices. It's how you have to place those devices in order to get it pinpointing to the correct location. So they do theirs by square mileage.
Okay. So when, I guess either if y'all pay for them or get a grant, when they install them, is there any conversations between the people installer with the department or where you guys would want to be located?
So we have discussion with them. They'll do a site survey and ensure that everything works out. And then once there's installation, if they have to tweak anything, they'll tweak it.
Okay. Does the department know where all the shot spotters are located through the city?
Yes.
Okay. So you guys do know how many are located in the city?
This type of technology, it's not dependent on how many acoustics receivers there are. They'll give us, like I talked about, that's going to be 1 mile radius. We draw out the mile radius that we want them in when we do our research, and actually the professor has actually helped with the research. We'll give them the geofence, the area that we need.
Mm-hmm.
They'll actually, whatever it takes. So I'm not sure with the technology, they have to make sure that they can accurately cover everything, and it has to triangulate. So it has to hit off 3 centers. Sometimes it can hit off 2, but it won't be as accurate in that area. So it has to hit off all 3 because it's calling triangulating the location, and they guarantee almost within 82 feet of where that shot's coming from. Sometimes it's a heck of a lot better. So I'd have to get one of their technicians in here. We really only worry about, can you cover that area and make sure it's accurate? And whatever sensors they need, depending on the landscape, depending on the height of the buildings, depending on where they can do it. They might have put an extra sensor or move some things around. Because if we're not getting hits in an area after this is a product, we're the client, if we're seeing some gaps in the system, they'll have to come out and tweak that. But they'll be testing it before we put it up online. And that's the way I've done it. And, really, I haven't had any expansion of ShotSpotter here, but I have had expansion of ShotSpotter as a chief in other locations. And I know how they do it. And then we mostly have to assist if sometimes we get permission where we put some of these sensors. If it's on a private, we have to get permission, or if it's a public area, or even a utility pole, we have to get permission from whoever has the authority over that area.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think you mentioned, Chief, and I could be wrong, please correct me, these shot spotters, sensors, poles, or whatever they are located in most gun common areas where guns are going off in communities. Is that correct?
Yeah, when we do analysis, and every city does, this is the 3rd city that I've been in where we start to do the analysis. We have a third-party validator that comes in, as well as an outside academic working with us. And when we take a look at these things, we look for the areas that most challenged with gunfire. And so when we start to assess the city, we're only looking at the amount of gunfire that's happening. We're looking at shots fired incidents through CAD calls, and where we're experiencing most of the calls and/or shooting victims. We take that data, and then we overlay where we think we could put that mile to get the additional mile where we can get the greatest use out of that, to see if we can calm down that violence. And also, as the professor talked about, if when the calls, 80% of the CAD calls or 80% of the shots fired are not being called in by a 911 call, at least we can get to more. Because in some of these areas, I've heard concerns in my community meetings that, there's no police response, but we checked on some of those things and no one called. And unless our officers can on view and hear that, it's not that we don't want to respond, we just don't know about it. And what happens is that in those areas that are having the greatest gunshots, we're responding to all of them. And sometimes, depending on the call volume, if it's a shots fired and we don't have an injury, sometimes a little bit of prioritization, but we're going to make sure we get to them. And if you just talk about after New Year's Eve, there were several hundred calls and talked about overwhelming July 4th and also New Year's Eve. We actually sent teams out all through the night and the next day to canvass every single one of those locations. And it took us more than a day to get to all the locations, but I had dedicated people because there was so much evidence out there. If those gunfire or shell casing came back to a homicide and/or a non-fatal shooting, we'll go out, re-canvass, look for video at that time that it happened, to see if we can tie that person into the case, because these are our trigger pullers, and if they're out there using the gun and even celebratory gunfire, the professor talked about it, that projectile has to come down somewhere.
Okay.
And it could hurt somebody.
I was going to switch to technology, but since we were on ShotSpotter and we had such a long presentation, Professor, you next. I got some questions for you. The sound, or not right?
Apologies for the length.
Oh, it's okay. I think it was I think it was informative. but maybe this is a question for you or the chief. You talked about being able to, I hope I may say this word wrong, defituate, or what, you can tell the difference between a gunshot, a firework, differentiate. Yeah, there we go. You could, how do you make that difference?
Make those differences. I'm gonna be honest with you.
I can't hear you say it again.
So ShotSpotter does that.
Okay, so how does ShotSpotter, because what was said is it picks up from the 3 mics a loud sound. So how is that technology that good to make a difference from a loud sound? Loud sound is a gun, but a loud sound also can be a firework. And I know plenty of times in the hood we'd be like, is that a firework or a gun? Because they sound very similar. So how can that technology tell the difference of what is a firework and what is a gunshot? Because if you shoot off probably a Glock sounds a lot different from a rifle, that sounds a lot different from, I don't know, I'm not a gun person, but if fireworks all sound different, that could be very similar to the gun sound. So how does that technology tell the difference?
Absolutely, I totally get what you're saying. So here kind of, and I don't know if you can see it real good, right? They're different waveforms. So this would be more typical of a gunfire. You get a sharp up creak and a downturn. Some sounds take a little bit longer. Some sounds are even quicker and down, up and down. So ShotSpotter has, like any other gunshot detection company, they use a database of, I assume at least, right? There's a lot of assumptions here on this answer from me because I don't know exactly what all these companies do. This is just what I've heard and what I've sort of observed. So what they do is they train their systems on existing sounds and their wave, and then match those to the wave that they picked up from, let's say, a sensor in St. Louis or 3 sensors in St. Louis, right? And they compare it to the waves they have in their original database and see what it matches closely. Is it gunfire? Is it non-gunfire? So that's how that first part of the process works in ShotSpotter or any kind of gunshot detection company. They all work relatively similar at that point. Then on the second stage where the Incident Review Center comes in, those are trained specialists, as ShotSpotter says. What that exactly entails, I couldn't tell you how they're being trained. You'd ask the company that on their own. But I can tell you, too, that I've listened to a lot of ShotSpotter alerts over the years. And in most cases, you can tell whether it's gunfire or something else. That doesn't mean I would personally feel qualified to make that decision. But what I have noticed in ShotSpotter alerts, for instance, I'm not talking just about St. Louis City, I'm talking more broadly now. Some of the things that ShotSpotter system at least used to pick up is when a semi-truck would have a blowout and you get that flopping sound of that loose tire and it hits that pavement, flop, 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 it would recognize that as gunfire. But then it goes into the review process and the reviewers kick it out because they can clearly hear it's not actual gunfire. But I imagine it has a very similar wave function to an actual gunshot. There's a similar issue too with train tracks sometimes where the clacking of the railroad track, that can also trigger a gunshot alert. But again, the incident review system typically picks that up and dismisses that particular sound. So the review process ensures, I think, that the system is probably more conservative than you think it might be of what it sends to the police. So I think in some cases, it will not send an actual gunfire alert to a police department because it is so conservative in trying to make sure what it sends for alert and for immediate response is really gunfire.
These ShotSpotter trained reviewers that you're talking about, are these people within the police department? So once it goes off, somebody in the department then say, oh, we review, that's a gunshot, so they go out to it. So
no, these are folks that work in the actual headquarters of ShotSpotter. So they have 2 headquarters, one in DC, one somewhere out in California.
Okay.
And that's where they operate out from.
Okay. Would you, and the reason I think we had such a long presentation on ShotSpotters, I think the department knows, the community, there's a lot of mixed feelings on the ShotSpotters alone itself. Like, is it effective or is it not? Would you consider ShotSpotters to be effective?
Yes.
So could you explain your rationale of kind of changing, as you say, being a professor, you wrote several documents on just in 2021 of how it's not effective, that, you know, it doesn't really help solve cases from 2008 to early 2018. There was more than 19,000 ShotSpotters called for service in the city, but only 13 arrests equal to those bullets being found. So why, I guess now, or how do you, as the committee trying to figure out, why do you feel that it is effective from your just recent less than 3 years ago saying it wasn't so effective?
So let me clarify what effective means, right? Because effective can mean different things. When I did the initial research, effective meant to me, does it reduce gun violence demonstrably that we can pick up in data? That was not the case in St. Louis at the time. So it was not effective in that particular way I operationalized the view of what effective meant back then. Since then, I have found in several locations, Winston-Salem, Cincinnati, that gunshot detection actually does reduce gun violence in those locations. So it can certainly be effective. And a lot of the differences, I think, between cities that have no reductions in gun violence versus cities that do, have a lot to do with best practices and how you implement those best practices. And I can tell you, too, that in the early days when St. Louis implemented ShotSpotter, there wasn't a lot of attention of how do we respond to these calls, how do we investigate. That was simply not really done at the time. And I think that played a big role in why it was not effective. Secondly, in the St. Louis City example, too, as I mentioned before, the Incident Review Center was not a thing when St. Louis initiated a service with ShotSpotter in 2009, 2008, whatever it was, and didn't become part of the expansion that I evaluated in the 2021 study. So it misses that information. In this new project we're doing, I do plan to, see if that has a differential impact now. But I think, too, more importantly, effective can mean other things, too, right? Effective can mean, can we assist gunshot victims? That can be a form of efficacy. Is it good for helping cases and solving cases? That can be a form of efficacy. So it all depends on what you think is efficacy. If you're just very, as I used to be, very narrowly founded on efficacy as meaning reductions in gun violence, you may not be going to say that it's going to be as effective as if you look at it from a much broader perspective. And that would, that would be my view on that.
Gotcha. What is this is the first time hearing about it, the new program that is being rolled out? Was it Smarter Initiative or?
Smart Policing Initiative?
Smart Policing. Is that an initiative that's been?
It's a grant program with the Department of Justice.
Okay. And we've already accepted that initiative or something?
Yes, the St. Louis Police Department was awarded on grants under fiscal year 21.
Okay. Last question on ShotSpotter. How often do we use, I guess, any evidence from ShotSpotters in proceeding to move forward? Maybe this was answered for a warrant, or does any of this sounds from ShotSpotters help be able to go to the next step of trying to get a warrant to get someone arrested?
We'll let the chief do that one.
ShotSpotter in itself is not going to get you a search warrant. You're not going to do that. It can get you a lead to get probable cause as you bring it. We just went through a couple of case scenarios that, we saw individuals that we identified prior to a homicide that they had shot a gun. We picked up the shell casings. No one was on the scene. And then after that evidence showed up at the homicide, we had a correlation between the two. We called the National Interballistic Information Network, where the shell casings matched. So we knew that gun was at both locations. Went back, and there's a video. Now we have very clear video of who our perpetrators can be. Then the detectives have to do their legwork, gather more evidence, and had they had probable cause, and I'm going hypothetically. I'm not going to go into a case, but I'm saying how this could stem into where we know they're in a known location. We can get a search warrant to maybe search for the evidence of that shooting if we did not recover the gun during the arrest. and we can go through, we get that through approval to a judge, and that's how it can lead there. So where you make it, how it can, that's why I'm very careful on making sure that when we say, if I had a shot spotter notification and we made an arrest, or if everyone, then it might be a stretch to say that. It's more about an overall investigation. And when it comes to search warrants, they can help us with leads, but they're certainly not going to be the only thing for us to secure a search warrant through a court order from the judge.
Gotcha. Last question, Chief. Thank you for all your answers. The cell site simulator, which it's not a Stingray, correct?
Stingray would limit you from absolutely making sure that you could put things out. So it's totally different what Stingray does as far as the cell site simulator. That prevents you from putting out information or censoring anybody's information, not capturing the information, just preventing you from communicating. Like if you're at a Cardinals game, or maybe a Yankees game, and it's
You was right the first time, Cardinals.
50,000 fans. Sometimes you can't get this overwhelmed with volume and the bandwidth of whatever provider you have. You're not going to be able to get out. That's not Stingray. Or you're in a bad location. Stingray is intentional to make sure that nobody can receive or put out signals. So we don't have that. And I
The
think
department doesn't have a system that, it would
Absolutely.
right over City Hall, all our phones.
right now, make sure that the news media here wasn't putting things out immediately or anybody was tweeting. No, we don't have that capability, nor should we ever have that type of capability.
Okay. So, but with the cell site simulator, you have one, and it sounds like between 1/01 of 2023 to this year of January, it's been used 379 times for investigations, resulting in 138 arrests, and it charged 1,083 people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the numbers that we gave in our report.
Okay.
I'd have to take a look, but going off the top of my head, I could read it right now and agree if we're going off the same report.
Okay. I think that's all I got right now.
And on that, a lot of it's fugitives, people that are wanted for justice, homicides, Part 1 crimes, as we talked to, violent felonies, and these are individuals that either already have probable cause that they're wanted or they're wanted for crimes, and we have an obligation to make sure that we bring them to justice, and so we use technology to try to track them where their whereabouts at. And that's a little bit specific to what you're talking about, where we could do that cell site finder.
Okay. On that, so is there an ongoing cost for that? Because it said there's no amount was spent during the fiscal year. Is that an ongoing thing the department pays for, or does that come out like the foundation grant or?
I believe the initial purchase was a grant, but there's no subsequent, like a monthly payment, something like that. There's no subscription. There's no funding or cost for that.
Oh, it's free?
Yeah, we own the equipment. Like the cell site simulator, we own it. There's no monthly service, I guess.
Okay.
And that was through, if you look at the PowerPoint, that was through a 2014 Urban Security Initiative grant, SE grant.
Gotcha.
All right. I just have I guess, two quick follow-up things. And if the answer is I don't know, that's totally acceptable. So on on ShotSpotter, it takes 3 to work. You had said that the contract works with basically you say, hey, we want this area of land covered. So that doesn't just mean that there's 3. So we're not getting charged per, I don't even know, per unit. We're getting charged by the square footage or the square mileage or something like that.
How Sound Thinking ShotSpotter charges, they charge by the geography, not amount of equipment to make it work.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And then, so you had also brought up testing of it. Is testing something that your guys do, or does ShotSpotter come out and do? I mean, does it go out there and fire a blank and go, hey, did we pick this up? Or
in the beginning, and I'm not sure because it's my first time going through it here, but I've worked with Sound Thinking before. They would have to fire just like a starter's pistol.
Sure.
And that's somewhere where if we have track meets in other cities, we have to be aware of that because that's going to trigger it, because that is a gun, but it's not a projectile coming out, but it's going to make the same loud noise and be picked up by ShotSpotter. We will do that. We'll be aware of that, or some other similar to that noise so they can test the area And then as we go through it, there might be some growing pains. Right now, even the equipment we have right now, if I said, we've had a shooting, and we've said, wait a second, why didn't ShotSpotter pick it up? Sometimes it might have been in a vehicle, or it might have been in a house and the victim was outside. We were able to determine that. And/or the system didn't pick it up, and we want them to do an audit to find out why, because we're paying some money for this, and actually, they're very good vendors, and they need to follow up because it's their reputation as well.
Got it. And then I just want to commend you on one thing that you said, that it took a minute for me to think about it and realize the benefits here. I want to thank you and your guys for going and picking up the shell casings after New Year's Eve and all the celebratory gunfire, because I imagine the people who are stupid enough to squeeze rounds off into the air to celebrate are some of the same people who are pointing those guns at people at other times. And so anything that we can get more information there, I think is certainly helpful. With that, I want to thank you all for coming out. I look forward to in the near future, when the use plans are completed, going through some of this again, I guess. I think that this is important in building transparency and building trust back in between various parts of the city and the police department. I know that it takes two sides to build a bridge, and it's important that you're here doing this today. I really appreciate it. And with that, we're going to move over to public comment. I hope that someone from your team can stick around and hear what some folks have to say.
Chairman, I will definitely have people from my team here to make sure everyone's concerns, and I'll be following up well.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And with that, Madam Clerk, how many people are signed up for public comment here? All right. If you could please call the first individual.
We have Reverend Roderick Burton, New Northside Missionary Baptist Church, in support.
Mr. Burton, please come forward. I'm sorry, what title would you prefer I use?
Reverend.
Reverend. All right, Reverend Burton. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give today is the truth to the best of your ability?
Yes, I do.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and those on the committee. I just thank you for this opportunity to speak. And there's some reasons why I think the ShotSpotter technology needs to continue to be utilized by the St. Louis Police Department. After 11 years of being a pastor, we've had 6 members that have been murdered. And of those 6, 5 were killed by guns, and 4 of them are still unsolved. Additionally, in the town I've been pastor, we've had 12 shootings on our property, one of which I picked up 16 7.62 millimeter shell casings that were fired as our youth drum ministry was participating. People have adjusted to, and they ignore this uncommon sound, which should be uncommon to any city or any place where people are living. And as the statistics have shown, they're not calling in. Yet, every time a gun is fired, it puts someone in danger, and that needs to be tracked. And I believe this technology facilitates a path to accountability, whether it's citizen shooting or whether it's the police. Many citizens, for plenty of good reasons, ranging from distrust of the criminal justice system or actual serious fear of retribution, they don't report things, but yet this technology is there to help bear witness. ShotSpotter does not record conversations. It's just attuned to the anomaly of gunshots. I think economically with the police department, at the size that it is, the resources that the officers have to just focus on violent incidents set off by guns, I think it makes sense. I guess I'm just a little shaken today because I think about the people who have expired. I think about James and Stephen Dent, April Owens, Darmel Stokes, Jennifer Griffith, and Sean Holland, all these people who've died. And, you know, here we are. It's just so common that 80% of the people are not reporting it. I think ShotSpotter will continue to work as part of a total thrust by nonprofits, elected officials, the public safety department, houses of worship, and everyone using whatever technology to make our city safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Reverend Burton. Next, we have Mr. Chris Wilcock in opposition.
All right, Mr. Wilcock, do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, 3 minutes, please proceed.
Well, I feel it would have been a good idea for you to ask the chief there to attest that they were going to tell the truth before he went and cut out, because
I will just note, and I'll give you back your time here, it's in our rules. We don't ask city employees to swear in. That's the reasosoning there. So
well, you might want to start because his own witness implicated something, at least one thing that he said that was misleading at best, where he said it clearly different. For instance, the ShotSpotter clearly differentiates between gunshots and fireworks, and then his own witness clearly said that it doesn't do that. The technology itself doesn't differentiate it. It has to be independently viewed, and so I would recommend maybe taking the police chief's statements with a little bit more credulity than him and his witness, because especially, you know, I imagine, I wonder what it's like being one of those students, because if that's the level of evidence that's acceptable in that course, they must be getting a lot of A's over there, because there was not very much evidence for hardly any of these claims that were made. I can tell you what there is evidence for, however, is that if these are so constant, the ShotSpotters, for example, are so concentrated in majority black neighborhoods, yet just 3 days ago, we had reports about the homicide clearance. There were less than half of homicides were solved. 1,900, so 900 out of 1,900 were solved, 2/3 of which were white victims. So it doesn't seem like any of this technology, despite the vast expansiveness of this, has even done so much as help solve these crimes, let alone do anything about them. And I can imagine how many different professions where that level of evidence is acceptable, and that's acceptable performance. Because we're talking about, and with Stingray, acting like this is something that they wouldn't possibly have. There's documentation from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch back to as early as 2012 of the police department trying to acquire a Stingray. The case that was potentially implicating use of Stingray was in 2015, where that's been reported in the Riverfront Times that they potentially dropped a robbery case because it would reveal that they had Stingray, which is a very interesting problem to have, because you're having a police department that is purchasing technology that not only is the public not aware of, elected officials who are supposed to hold them accountable are not even aware of the technology the police department possesses. So the fact that they were doing this for 10 years, 2014 is when they said they purchased this technology, and that we didn't know about this publicly for 10 years, which is about the same amount of time that the Real-Time Crime Center has been in operation. So they've been allowed to do all of this with no oversight for 10 years, and we're just now learning about it. And we're expected to believe them in all of their claims that they're making, especially since they're not required to be under oath, so there's no legal accountability after any of these statements of fact. So those are all things that I think would be really important to consider. You know, particularly for ShotSpotter, the only data point cited is the amount of times that it was recorded.
If you could just wrap up your thought, you're a bit past time, but I took some time from you, and I gave that back.
That's fine. So we used it a lot, therefore it's effective. No, not a single shred of evidence for whether it's solving crime, whether it's actually connected to even actual gunshots. And so I really hope that this is going to be more credulous going forward, because the public demands better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcock. Next, we have in support Ms. Amber Cole. She's on line.
Ms. Cole, if you could turn on your camera and microphone. All right.
Yes.
Ms. Cole, if you could raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
Yes.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, I'd like to thank the chief and the people, the professor that came in to give the information. I'm so glad the chief did come in and explain what this is happening. Maybe we wouldn't have to have all these conversations that we've been having for the last couple of years. Someone said something about data. I'm gonna let you know about some data. The data I'm gonna give you is that a life that you have with a kid is 300, the amount of money you spend, $3,693 a month. A year, 40,000. And then if I'm speaking on behalf of my community as well as a grandmother. My grandson was born on May the 26th, 1996, and he was murdered on 1/11/2022. So we missed this data about the amount of money was spent that he has been spent on him, which was almost $1 million. So if you're going to use some data, use that data and put that data that I could have had a grandson still here. Put that $1 million towards stop fire or sound thinking. If we want to look at data, we want to look at the maybe 200 or 150,000. 150 people that was murdered last year. How many people would have been not murdered? Or either the case would have been solved or at least pushed towards that way. I know the Dent brothers that the pastor was talking about. I know them because I was served at that funeral, and I'm walking with the mother of that mother of that individual, them two brothers. Also, let's look at if you're gonna raise a head, look at the things that goes on with individuals walking around with guns, even just last night. So I'm hoping that somebody was able to get some evidence there that happened to that individual that was on that parking lot, on the gas lot. If somebody would have this much tenacity for as solving a crime as putting gas stations in our community, we'd probably be okay. If we're looking at surveillance, anytime you are driving down the street and you have your phone on, you're being surveyed. Anytime you go into Sam's or Walmart, you're being surveyed. So when you talk about is the cost outweigh what we're getting, my heart is overwhelmed at this time because we keep on putting lives in jeopardy. I'm looking at O'Fallon Park, where
Ms.
people
Cole?
are walking around.
Ms. Cole, if you could
Yes.
just finish your thought. You're at your time, but if you could just finish your thought, please.
Yes, sir. In O'Fallon Park, we have people walking around with guns and shooting. My house has been shot. I got damage in my house because of gunfire. But I was able to call the police and tell the police where it was, and they was able to go out and look for it. So I am in total support of this surveillance and anything we can do to stop the violence or stop the bleed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cole.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Next, we have online Dr. Donovan Price.
Dr. Price, if you could, there, I see you now, I believe.
Yes.
If you could, yep, there's your name, I see it. If you could raise your right hand, and do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
Yes, it is.
All right, you have 3 minutes, please proceed.
As you said, my name is Pastor Donovan Price, Dr. Donovan Price. I'm a victim advocate actually in Chicago. who's worked with ShotSpotter. I live ShotSpotter. I work with it every night as I respond to the shootings and homicides scenes here in Chicago. So far this year, we've had 225 homicides in Chicago, and I respond to about a third of them personally. And so to say what ShotSpotter can and can't do in terms of fighting crime, it almost does it a disservice when we understand that. I know here in Chicago, we've had 3 particular officers. One officer who was being shot at and who was actually shot, who was running, and the only thing he could scream out in order to help people to find his location was ShotSpotter, the word ShotSpotter. And to see the film of him running and realizing that his last hope was to say ShotSpotter will help you in terms of what you want to put on your statistical data. Also, Officer Ariana Preston, a young female officer who was shot and killed here in Chicago, who the first notice of her being shot was ShotSpotter alerts. 2 sets of ShotSpotter alerts because the people circled back and shot her again, which she died as well. And most recently, Officer Luis Herrera, who was shot and killed and was only found because of a ShotSpotter alert. There were no calls. There were no calls in any of the instances from the citizens, unfortunately. ShotSpotter, I live it every night. When I get a ShotSpotter alert, and the ShotSpotter alerts triangulate, as the professor said and as the chief said, they triangulate, and so that you get a shot, 20 shots fired at 80th and Halsted, 20 shots fired at 8032 Halsted by several different types of guns from the side of the house or from the alley or from the back. It's that detailed. And so the officers have a hand up when they come. The fact that the officers themselves generally are overwhelmingly for ShotSpotter, the people who live with ShotSpotter, the families of the victims, the many victims, whether they're shot, the victims who live, fortunately, the families of the victims who have passed away, the survivors. That's a sign of what ShotSpotter can do. And unfortunately, some of this is heartstring type stuff. But the fact of the matter is, you can't put a life on a statistical data. Will it fight crime? Will it lead to an arrest? Will it lead to a conviction? I don't know if that can ever be proven. But then again, Perry Mason didn't wear a cape either, so we don't know what could have done and what wasn't done. The fact of the matter is, if there's a gun violence problem, then gunshot detection is what they call a no-brainer. And it's not a no-hearter, and it's definitely not a no-souler, because if you have a soul and a heart and you love people and you know the importance of life, then it's important that you keep ShotSpotter.
Thank you, Reverend. And just to take a brief second here, I want to thank you for your work. You said you respond to a third of the homicides in Chicago.
At least.
That's incredibly impressive, and your city's lucky to have you.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk, if we could move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Next, we have online Mr. Gary Hasna.
All right, Mr. Hasna, if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
Yes, I do.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, my name is Gary Hazen, a lifelong resident of the Shaw neighborhood, 43-year-old homeowner, a 43-year homeowner with an active member of the neighborhood organization. I've been primarily involved with safety. I want to express my thanks and support to Chief Tracy, generation of what is the annual police department surveillance technology report and presentation today. One recommendation I would have, and I guess this is going to be in the future, is that the presentation or what I saw today fell short a little bit on equipment age, operational status, percentage of on time, and a fair and equitable distribution across neighborhoods, because we really don't know where they're at unless you look really hard for them. It's my understanding that this document will be used for funding and deployment. So it's critical that the technology limitations, maintenance age, and distribution be known. In addition to the operational ask, and I asked this in my Alder portion, I believe it's imperative that those making the decisions be educated in the capabilities and limitations of the technology used. It was clear in viewing the previous testimony, I saw a few of these, and then the input from some Board of Alderman personnel that there are fundamental assumptions and lack of knowledge. Quite honestly, just what I saw today, a lot of that was really there's a lot of education today. As you're all aware, in the light of deficiency of staffing, surveillance technology is a key force enhancement. These technologies are proven to directly or indirectly assist in solving crimes within the city of St. Louis and across the U.S. We must ensure that those making the decisions are fully informed and that considerations are clear regarding the age and limitations of our current systems, so that we can fully fund and deploy equipment fairly across the region and provide maximum effectiveness. One last thing, very quickly, is that I forwarded some information, and this is for Mr. Ramirez as well, related to ShotSpotter technology that I've seen personally in action and I follow. That ShotSpotter technology in that city, I have seen personally result in arrest in 2 to 48 hours. I'd like for Daniela to Alderman Velasquez to provide that to the other members on the board. And then I would also offer, I would pay for 2 board members to actually travel to the city, so we could show them that technology, how it's being used, and I can give them some additional information as well. I'll pay for that if they're willing to do that and understand more about the deployment of that system. It's different from the deployment here, but the deployment in that city coordinates spotters and cameras in some tight locations, and it's pretty amazing how direct correlations and direct arrests are made within 2 to 48 hours. That's all I have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hosnet. Next, Madam Clerk.
Next, we have Mr. John Chasnoff.
All right. Mr. Chasnoff, you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, 3 minutes, sir. Please proceed.
Okay, so I didn't come to prepare to debate ShotSpotter today. I didn't know that would be our topic, but I did come with a pretty strong critique about the report itself, and so I wanted to bring up a bunch of both criticisms and just questions about the report. So the first thing I wanted to say is that the Real-Time Crime Center is a surveillance technology in and of itself, and the fact that it was omitted from the report, I think, is a big omission. When I look at the executive order, the definition of surveillance technology, it fits very clearly. And if I'm right about that, I would love for the department to do an addendum to this report and include the Real-Time Crime Center. Also, the report mentions the St. Louis Fusion Center, which I've been told in the past, the Fusion Center is just a telephone number over the weekend, but the report makes me think that there is more to it than that. And if there is surveillance capabilities in the St. Louis Fusion Center, I would love to hear the differentiation between that and the crime center, and I think it's included in the report. I also agreed with Alderwoman Saunier when she talked about the effectiveness of some of these things. I don't think the report really showed effectiveness. To tell us that the mobile trailers are moved X number of times doesn't really tell us much about how effective they are. To tell us that there were 225,000 electronic requests, again, doesn't tell us much about effectiveness. So I'd love to see some data that shows reduction, violent crime reduction in some of the areas where ShotSpotter is, for example. Also, I had just some questions when it was talking about the cost for the license plate readers. It said refer to the Board of Public Service. I didn't know why that was there instead of some, an actual number. the shot spotter costs were not separated out. There was a grant and the police foundation and city money all lumped together, where that was divided out in other places. So I'd love to see that divided out. I have a question about why fixed camera data is retained for 30 days, but LPR data for 90 days. You know, is there a technological reason for that or a policy reason for that? No length of retention was given for body cameras or car camera data. I wondered with the mugshot system, it said that the mugshot data was kept until a certain amount of time after they were notified by other agencies that they no longer were holding that data. So I wondered what was the system to make sure that the other agencies, the police departments around the region, are accurately reporting back to the fusion center to make sure that
Mr. Chesnoff, that's your time. If you could just wrap up your thought, please.
Okay, just two more very quick points. Under complaints, it asked for a list of complaints and all we got were numbers. And at one point it asked for membership on task forces and that data, there was no information given on memberships of task forces. That's my testimony for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chesnoff.
Next, we have an opposition, Ms. Rachel Hurtado.
In person or virtual?
Virtual.
Okay.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can. If you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
I do.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Okay, I did not plan or prepare to testify today, and this hearing came in extremely late notice for community, which is something I want to say off the top. But the presentation over ShotSpotter by the professor was the single most irresponsible academic presentation I have seen in my days. And I highly encourage the members of this committee to look over each slide with scrutiny, as I can tell you already are. The quote, an academic's perspective on the usefulness of ShotSpotter is full of conjecture and baseless assumptions. Please note that this professor, who came to conclusions based on data in his study from a few years ago, has not presented any data or studies that are new, that have suddenly changed his mind, changed his perspective, changed his opinion, or the facts that he's presenting about the efficacy of ShotSpotter. The biggest red flag that I think we should be looking at here is the shifting goalposts. This is extremely irresponsible in data science. If you come to the conclusion in your first study that ShotSpotter is ineffective or does not have significant efficacy in addressing or reducing gun violence in a particular city, in St. Louis, and then you decide to shift the goalpost and say, actually, what we're measuring here is not actually reduction in gun violence. It's whether or not victims feel heard, whether or not community members feel listened to, whether or not police feel like this helps them solve crimes. That is extremely irresponsible, and it is manipulation of data when there's actually no significant or change at all in what the study found, which is that the ShotSpotter technology did not have an impact or reduction in gun violence in our city. So the shifting goalpost here is really concerning to me, and I think that we should all see that as a red flag. Also, please note that this presentation was, if you watch it back, it is full of the word probably, possible, and potential benefits, meaning that every single slide outlining the possible, probable, and potential benefits of using technology, including ShotSpotter, are not actually data-driven. They are not actually empirically backed or proven. These are assumptions that are made, again, by shifting the goalposts and saying, actually, our goal is not in reducing gun violence. It's in some of these other things that are maybe intangible. I would say, based on the professor's own experience in a home invasion, as well as several of the testimonies today, people's experiences in their lives with gun violence, The goal for community members, for the residents of St. Louis, is a reduction in gun violence. That is what we want to see. And if the police are deploying technology, that's what we want to see them be like efficacious towards. And that is just
Ms.
absolutely not
Hurtado,
true for
you're at your
gun-
time. If you
for
could just wrap up
ShotSpotter
your
in our
thought,
city.
please.
The last thing I'll say is that the one piece of evidence that the professor did cite was one particular study coming out of Cincinnati. We are definitely going to be looking into that. I encourage y'all to do the same because it is the only piece of empirical data that the professor presented in this entire presentation about ShotSpotter that would back any claim doing this complete 180 on the findings of his study from 2020. So yeah, we'll definitely be following up and looking at his data rigorously. I encourage y'all to as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hurtado. Next, we have Ms. Tammy Bufford in opposition.
All right. Ms. Bufford, do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is true to the best of your ability?
do.
All right, 3 minutes, please proceed.
Okay. I was truly not prepared to say anything today because, of course, it was a last minute notice that this was even going on and that the community could even give input. It's really frustrating that every time we come here and the police has a presentation and there's supposed to be public input, that he never stays around to get the public input. The whole presentation was on ShotSpotter, which we know is junk science. And we're spending a lot of money on putting a bunch of microphones in areas, and it's not preventing any crime. It's not solving any crime. And you cannot tell me that the police are going out on New Year's or 4th of July picking up shell casing. If I call the police and say there's gunshots in my area, it takes hours if they show up. So you cannot tell me that they're going out on these calls, and then you're saying that not everything is recorded. You have to triangulate and then go back. So then after you've made these triangulations and then went back, when is it being recorded? I mean, how far do we back it up to record these gunshots or so-called gunshots? Because we don't know if they're gunshots, if they're backfiring from a car, if he said it was a tire rolling over, or if it's, fireworks. So how is this technology helping us? If the police are out here in the community doing their jobs, then we won't have that. They claim that they're understaffed, but you can go out on 13,000 calls from just a ShotSpotter, but you can't respond when the community calls you. I feel like this is very frustrating. The so-called report that they've given out, and then he's still claiming that some of the technology that we know that they have, they don't have, they're not using, not a part of their thing. It's still not being transparent. We cannot figure out exactly what they have, what they're using, and what they're using it for. That's all I have to say. It's just frustrating.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Bufford. That's all we have.
All right. With that, do we have any written testimony?
No.
Okay. Does anyone have any announcements? All right, hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to excuse Alderman Oldenburg. I was going to say, Rashid's not going to. I'll second it.
Second.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
All right, sounded like 3-1 to me. So we will excuse Alderman Oldenburg, and with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Previous roll. Hearing no objection, we stand adjourned.
We couldn't.